So what was already an exciting week for USC fans as the Trojans are set to open up their college football season this weekend just got even sweeter as the number one quarterback in the class of 2026 and the number one player in the nation in the class of 2026, Julian Lewis, commits to USC. And typically, when a prospect is this far out, we won't even talk about it. But Julian Lewis is not your typical prospect, and with that in mind, today, we need to break it down. But before we can, as always, y'all know the drill. I have got to hear from you. Hop down to the comments. Two questions today. First and foremost, are you excited that Julian Lewis commits to USC? And then secondly, do you believe he stays a Trojan? Give me a Y for yes or an N for no. And if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. Hit that bell notification, especially with the season getting here. We got you covered for all of your college football content, and I'd love to have you a part of this fast-growing, amazing community. But with all that in mind, let's jump right into it. And before we begin, I need to preface everything in this video by saying there is a long time between now and whenever Julian Lewis puts pen to paper. But with that in mind, let's break this down, because as I alluded to in the intro, Julian Lewis is not a typical prospect. In fact, if we go back to what he did last year as a true freshman, he put college football coaches around the nation on notice, because as a true freshman in the highest classification of Georgia high school football, which by the way is extremely competitive, he lit it up. He threw for over 4,000 yards, a 65% completion percentage, and 48 touchdowns to 12 interceptions. And what's more, in the state championship game, he went for over 500 yards. Now, they ended up losing the game, but it's important to note that one, that was the only loss he had on the season, and two, who they lost that game to. It was Mill Creek, and if you're familiar with recruiting, you may know Mill Creek because they were loaded with talent, especially a player that we talked about yesterday on the episode of Through the Haze, by the way. Every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. Would love to have you over there as we break down all the biggest headlines in college football, but alas, we were talking yesterday about some true freshmen that if you're excited for the season, you need to be over the moon for these names. Caleb Downs was one of the names we covered, as Alabama is very excited about what he's going to provide them in that secondary as both safeties for the Crimson Tide move on to the next level. A true freshman for Alabama, a team that recruits as well as anybody in the nation, has been a bright spot, and he looks to be a starter. Well, he played for Mill Creek. He was on that state championship team. So Julian Lewis, in an effort where he ended up losing, threw for 500 yards in the highest classification of Georgia high school football in the biggest game as a true freshman against a team that had college football players on it. He is that gifted. There's a reason why coaches such as Kirby Smart, Nick Saban were in on this kid early, trying to lay the foundation. But now we need to turn our attention to the commitment. Julian Lewis to USC, and in a lot of ways this makes a lot of sense. First and foremost, we need to acknowledge who the head coach of USC is, which is Lincoln Riley, and then after we acknowledge who it is, we need to acknowledge the history Lincoln Riley has with the quarterback position, and we don't have to go back very far. Just last season, Caleb Williams won the Heisman Trophy. He returns and looks to be the number one quarterback taken off the board whenever the NFL draft rolls around, and has a good chance at repeating as the Heisman Trophy winner because he is that gifted, and we saw so much growth from his freshman season to his sophomore year, and personally, I still think there's a lot of room to go before he hits his ceiling. I think Caleb is an otherworldly talented quarterback. I think there's still more development to go, which is crazy to think when you watched how gifted he was last season, to think, hey, he can be even better. And if that development continues, the Pac-12 needs to watch out because he's going to light it on fire. So it makes sense to me when I see a five-star blue-chip quarterback look at Lincoln Riley and acknowledge, okay, you've had a history of developing the quarterback position. There have been multiple names I can point to that you have worked with that have not only succeeded in college, but then gone on to the NFL. And that's the goal for a lot of these guys. We talk about this all the time whenever a defensive lineman or a linebacker or a cornerback commits to Georgia or Alabama or Ohio State. It's tough to argue with the decision because it's just a factory of getting those type of players, developing them, and then churning them into NFL players. Lincoln Riley gets to claim that same sort of factory status with the quarterback position. Now, in fairness, he hasn't been a head coach for very long, though the years he has been a head coach have been very impressive. And when I say very long, we're talking about the grand scheme of things here, right? Relative to some other coaches in the game. But at the end of the day, this is a fantastic win for USC. Yes, we understand that there's a long time between now and whenever pen hits paper, but that doesn't diminish from the excitement that USC fans should feel right now. Have no doubt that teams such as Alabama, that teams such as Georgia, Tennessee, heck, all of college football will continue to recruit Julian Lewis as they should. He is that gifted. But in that same light, so too will USC continue to recruit Julian Lewis, and the one thing USC has going for them is who the head coach is, being Lincoln Riley, and the history he has with the quarterback position. Look, we can ask questions about USC going into this season. None of them revolve around the offense, and certainly none of the questions we may ask or any of the discussions we may have about Lincoln Riley, none of them revolve around the quarterback position, because that's spoken for, and it makes complete sense to me when you're a five-star quarterback and you look at Lincoln Riley, especially a five-star quarterback that, in theory, fits into the scheme perfectly. It makes perfect sense when he looks at that and says, yeah, I want to take my chance and go there, because he has a proven record of working with guys like me and sending those guys to the NFL after they collect some hardware in college. So interesting to see what happens here, but USC fans, hop down to the comments, let me know what you're thinking. Heck, if you're a Georgia-Alabama fan, do you believe you're able to flip Julian Lewis? USC fans, I know you're over the moon. Hop down to the comments, let me know what you're thinking. But what in addition to the 2026 class? Yes, for the third time, long ways before pen hits paper, but that does not diminish what a fantastic win this is for Lincoln Riley and the Trojans. That's it. See ya.